As you may know, the Sega Genesis was originally adapted from Sega's System 16 arcade board. This means it should be able to play decent ports of games like Fantasy Zone, Altered Beast, Golden Axe, and Alien Storm. So I wanted to check out these and other arcade ports and see if they're any good. Let's start with Afterburner. I could never get enough of this game. I remember playing it in the arcades and it was always a total rush, especially if you were in a cockpit cab. Either way, this game is super fun to play, and it's just so easy. Just fly, shoot, dodge. The control stick makes it feel like you're flying a real jet. I mean, truly, I feel like I'm flying a jet. The Genesis game is very fast and fun. It's not a one-to-one copy, but it does an admirable job of mimicking the arcade. The only downside is you have to play with the Sega Genesis controller. It's just no substitute for that original arcade stick. The graphics are far less impressive, but this is still a fun port. Alien Storm. It's a beat-em-up game, but instead of using your fists, you're using futuristic weapons like lasers or whips. There's a lot of different enemies, and they just pop up everywhere. However, it feels as if the hit detection is off somehow. I actually prefer the stages where you just shoot into the screen and destroy everything. That's a blast. Okay, here we have the Genesis game, which feels similar to the arcade in the gameplay department anyway. The strange hit detection is just as off. Also, the background graphics are way more repetitive than the arcade. If you like Alien Storm, this is a pretty decent conversion. Altered Beast. This is a side-scrolling brawling game where you punch and kick zombies, harpies, wolves, snakes, and other odd creatures. Power up. You need to collect 3 power-ups from the white wolves before you can take on the boss. When you have all 3, you turn into a powerful creature, making your attacks much easier. The Genesis game is an improved version of the arcade, has better parallax scrolling backgrounds, but the sounds and voice are a little scratchy. Power up. Controls have always felt a little sluggish to me, but that's probably my own inability to press the buttons fast enough. I think the home port of Altered Beast does the original arcade game proud. Captain America and the Avengers. This is a beat-em-up game featuring Captain America, Iron Man, Vision, and Hawkeye, each with different types of attacks. I've always really loved this hand-painted look of the graphics. So cool. The game tries to keep things fresh with different playstyles, and I definitely appreciate it. This is definitely a classic game. As for the Genesis conversion, well, thankfully it's much better than the Super Nintendo game anyway. The gameplay is similar to the arcade, and it also has many different play styles. The music is great, but the graphics are a little watered down in comparison to the arcade. Still, I really do love this game. It's great. Caveman Ninja. This one is a side-scrolling action game where you have to save your cave women from an enemy tribe. You can get different weapons to attack with, like stone wheels, arrowheads, and boomerangs. It's a short trip to the boss though, and they're pretty tough. I couldn't even get past this Audrey 2 boss. For the Genesis, the game was renamed to Joe and Mac, and it's closer to the arcade than the Super Nintendo version. Genesis graphics are not quite as colorful as the arcade, but still very detailed. The animation is also very well done. This is a fun one. Double Dragon. One of the earliest and most popular beat-em-up games, Double Dragon has been ported to nearly every game system. You play as Billy or Jimmy Lee on a rescue mission to save Marion. I mean, come on, we all know the story, right? There are several different attacks you can perform: punches, kicks, headbutts, knee kicks, but the best one is the elbow smash. It does a lot of damage and it's pretty easy to pull off. Graphics are very detailed and there's really no repetition at all. Now, I was honestly surprised when I heard that Double Dragon was going to appear on the Sega Genesis. The graphics are much improved over the 8-bit systems, but the character movement is just way too fast. It's almost as if this is a European PAL game. And the enemy AI consists of run 2-player and attack. That's pretty much it. The music is more grating to my ears in the arcade, and that's really saying something. I don't really like this port. Fantasy Zone. What the heck is this game anyway? A shooter? A Defender clone? A cute 'em up? I don't know. I do know that you're supposed to shoot the floating bases and avoid the other enemies. Once you destroy the bases, then you face off against the boss. The Genesis game is Super Fantasy Zone, but I don't think this is meant to be a port of this version of the arcade game. It's the same basic game, but the graphics are way different. Sega definitely improved on the original arcade with this one. I found it to be a little more fun, but it may be just because it's easier. I don't really care for this game in any way, but this port is pretty good. Final Fight. I've always loved this beat-em-up game. The huge characters, the detailed graphics, the many attacks you can perform, and just the general mayhem of the game provides an enjoyable time. It's not too hard either, but it does have some troublesome characters, that's for sure. This one only officially appeared on the Sega CD, and I'm not really sure why. Certainly the Genesis was able to do it proper justice. Maybe there's some licensing thing with Nintendo, I don't know. Anyway, the Sega CD game is great. Sure, the graphics are a little bit grainy and not as colorful, but the music is absolutely amazing. Definitely a fun time. Now let me mention the homebrew Mega Final Fight. This one is native to the Genesis and is shaping up to be even better. Well, without the CD quality music. I can't wait for this one to be finished. It looks awesome. Frogger. A rather obscure game that no one really talks about. I mean, seriously, have you ever heard of Frogger before? I mean, of course, I'm kidding. Frogger is one of the greatest games to ever come out of the golden age of arcades, and, you know, I pretty much play it every chance I get. The Genesis game is far superior to the Super Nintendo game because it actually looks and plays like the arcade game. The graphics, music, sounds, and controls are just spot on perfect. Although this does seem to be a little bit easier than the arcade. So if you like the arcade game as I do, you will love this port. Golden Axe. I freaking love this beat-em-up game. It was so different to use swords and axes to attack with instead of your fists. You can even ride creatures to improve your attacks, which adds a lot to the gameplay. Also, I just love kicking those little elves or whatever they are to get your magic potions and meat to extend your life. Take that, you little puke. When I got the Genesis game, I thought it was absolutely identical to the arcade, and for the most part, it is. The graphics aren't quite as good, but the gameplay is just spot on. This version also includes some extra stages not seen in the arcade game. This is an awesome conversion. Love it. King of the Monsters. A Neo Geo classic wrestling game with giant monsters smashing buildings and landmarks. You have 6 characters to choose from, each with different special moves. You can throw objects like jets and buildings to weaken your opponent, then you pin them to advance to the next stage. The Genesis game only has 4 characters to choose from, and it's just like the Super Nintendo game. The graphics are nice and detailed, but not quite as colorful as the arcade. Still, it's a fun time smashing the buildings and crushing your enemies. Lethal Enforcers. This is a gun game with digitized graphics, and it adds a nice sense of realism. This is a pretty basic game, really just shoot the bad guys and don't shoot the people trying to escape. I always thought it was kind of cool that the guns themselves looked realistic, aside from the blue and red colors anyway. Now there's 2 Sega versions of the game, one for the Genesis and one for the Sega CD. The only real difference that I can tell is that the music is way better on the Sega CD. It'd be a pity if there weren't more stages though. Graphics are a little grainy, but at least you can use the Justifier gun for more authentic gameplay. If you like the arcade game, you'll probably like this version. Mortal Kombat. The original blood-soaked fighting game includes 7 characters that battle in a tournament to save the world from Shang Tsung and his 4-armed monster Goro. All of the characters share the same basic moves, which makes it really easy to try different players. What's cool though is that they all have their own special moves and finishing moves, which makes the game stand out.
Scorpion wins. Flawless victory.
The Genesis version of Mortal Kombat was the preferred home port, mostly because it had the blood and finishing moves in it. You did have to enter a code to get it though. The graphics are a little pared down from the original, but the game plays nicely enough. This is a decent conversion of the game, but the Sega CD has a little bit better music. NBA Jam Tournament Edition! The wild 2-on-2 basketball game featuring actual characters from the NBA. But don't look for Jordan because he's not in it, unfortunately. If you time it just right and use the turbo, you can do special awesome slam dunks. And the fun factor is just elevated by having tons of cool announcements by Tim Kitzrow. Here, let me try to do my Tim Kitzrow impression. He's on fire! Boom shakalaka! Is it the shoes? Don't tell him I did that. Over on the Genesis, the game is still a lot of fun to play. It's not missing too much.
No way!
Some background animation, some voice, and the scaling in and out of the players.
Hello.
The The important thing is that it's fast and fun to play, and this conversion got it right within the limits of the hardware. Yeah, I would say I love this conversion. Pit Fighter. The original digitized fighting game before Mortal Kombat was, of course, by Atari Games. All the best stuff came out of Atari, you know, they were always innovating, weren't they? Anyway, this game has some huge characters and fast gameplay. If you hit all 3 buttons at the same time, you'll do a special move. Knock down your opponent and you can even hit them while they're down. That always cracks me up. This is a game that just has absolutely no rules at all, and it's a blast. The Genesis conversion is missing so much. The characters are tiny and the music is just very weak. It's almost as if your view was pulled too far back from the action. But, you know, at least it does play like the arcade for the most part. I mean, it could be worse. You could have bought the Super Nintendo version. Samurai Shodown! The Neo Geo classic weapons-based fighting game. There are 12 different characters to choose from, each with different fighting styles. The sounds and music are just outstanding. The graphics are also great, but the zooming in and out is just a little bit distracting. I found this one to be kind of tough, though. I think I may have had it on hard. The Genesis game is very good, however, it's missing the Earthquake character and his stage. It's also missing many sound effects and some of the animations. I usually play as Galford, and I noticed that the dog didn't do as much as he did in the arcade. Still, this is a great conversion of the game, and it should keep most fans happy. Saturday Night Slam Masters, brother! Capcom's over-the-top cartoonish wrestling game. You can choose from 8 different wrestlers, including Hagar from Final Fight. There are tons of special moves like in Street Fighter 2, but honestly I never learned any and I just played the game straight. I do love those animated background graphics and the music is fantastic. The Genesis port plays similarly to the arcade, but boy is it watered down. The graphics are darker and less colorful, the characters are smaller, and the music is just so tinny. The voice also has that signature Genesis scratchiness to it, but hey, at least it plays close to the arcade. Overall, this is a pretty good port of the game with just a few shortcomings. Smash TV! This twin-stick shooter shows us what it will be like in the future. What year? 2084, perhaps? Anyway, all you do is run, shoot, grab power-ups, and avoid enemies. It's an easy but fun game with great graphics and amazing sound effects. As for the Genesis game, well, plays well enough, but the graphics and sounds have taken a huge hit. Also, the controls are a mess, and you really need a gamepad in Port 2 in order to play the game properly with a twin-stick shooting action. Unfortunately, when you do this, you can't play in 2-player mode.
No way!
Honestly, I think this conversion could have been a lot better. Street Fighter II Champion Edition. The original Street Fighter game was kinda lame, but Capcom finally got it right with a sequel and its updates. The Champion Edition includes 12 characters instead of the original 8. Now you can play as the bosses! The sounds and graphics are stunning, and the controls are absolutely perfect. I never thought I would see a Genesis port of Street Fighter II, but here it is, and it's fantastic. It's called Street Fighter II Special Champion Edition to differentiate itself from the Super Nintendo version. The graphics are very close to the arcade, even if the resolution isn't quite as good. The characters are a little bit smaller, but that's okay, because you're going to be playing this on your giant television at home anyway, right? Controls are great too, especially if you have the 6-button controller. The sounds are pretty good, but the voices are just a little bit scratchy. But I've gotten used to it, and I kind of find that endearing. I absolutely love this port. Strider. Capcom's side-scrolling action game where you swing a super sharp sword. I think. You never actually see the sword, do you? The goal here apparently is to jump around and slice your enemies in half before getting hit 3 times. If you do die, you get kicked back to the checkpoint instead of being able to continue. Super annoying when you and the boss die at the exact same time. Ugh. As for the Genesis version, it was coded by Sega, and they did a really good job with it. I remember all the magazines were going crazy over it since it was the first 8-megabit game. It definitely looks and plays like the original arcade, that's for sure. Oh, and it's also just as hard as the original, so they got that right. So I've never really cared for Strider as a game, but I do like this port. I think they did a great job with it. Sunset Riders. I would describe this game as Contra set in the Old West, but with cartoons. You can get upgraded guns that will shoot in multiple directions, which is very helpful. There's also a variety of stages to keep things interesting. This is a really cool arcade game, and I love it. Now let's take a look at the Genesis version of the game. First of all, you only get 2 characters to choose from instead of 4. Secondly, the graphics are way darker and less colorful. Character animation isn't as good either. Come on, I know that Genesis can do better than this. Also, the music is just very weak sounding. It still plays pretty well, but overall this could have been a lot better. Terminator 2, the arcade game. That is the worst Artie impression I've ever done. This is a shooting game based on the movie, and it's as tough as nails. You might as well just buy the whole machine for the amount of money that it would cost you to beat it. I love the digitized graphics and the voice samples from Artie. This is a fun game, but it's just too freaking long. The Genesis game is okay, but why is the sky red? Also, the rest of the graphics are hurt pretty badly by the system's lack of color depth and resolution. Not to mention, playing with a controller isn't nearly as fun as playing with a gun. Sure, you can use the Menacer, but it just doesn't feel at all like the originals. Honestly, I kind of dislike this port. Truxton! A top-down shooter that's gained legendary status thanks to classic game room. Well, in my opinion anyways. Honestly, I'd never even given it two thoughts before Mark Bussler started going on and on about it. It's a good game for sure, but it's pretty dang hard. Or maybe I just suck at it, I don't know. The Genesis game is one of the best shooters on the system. The graphics, sounds, and music are all great. Collecting the weapon power-ups is always fun, and I try to get the one most like the spread gun. Also, the Mega Bomb is just freaking awesome. This is a fantastic port of the arcade game, and while I suck at it, I still love it. Virtua Racing! One of the original polygon racers, this one is by far my favorite. Something about those flat shaded polygons that I just love. The sense of speed in the game is great. What's also cool is that you can change your perspective. You can be in the cockpit, looking behind your car, or even way above it. I can't comment on the controls because the original had a steering wheel and I'm using a controller. The Sega Genesis version needed an extra chip to help it push the polygons, and push them it did. The resolution of the game definitely took a hit, but it still plays and sounds much like the original arcade. The sense of speed is also amazing, and that's really important in a racing game. Controls are also pretty good, and it gets by using the controller. This is a port that I definitely love. Alright, well there you have it, a ton of arcade ports for the Sega Genesis. How do you feel about some of these arcade ports? Did the Genesis do a good job with them? Please let me know down in the comments. With all that said, I want to thank you for watching, take care, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye everybody.